The third topic on moral issues is on homosexuality. In this presentation, we will follow the teachings of the Bible, our Catholic Church, and the natural law. It is important to have a rational and logical explanation of the problem of homosexuality. There are three kinds of orders. First, the supernatural order, meaning above nature. Supernatural order is, as its name explains it, an order above the natural order. It is the order of the spiritual life which will follow after this life. As Jesus says, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. And this begins in this life by faith. For example, this is the case of a vocation to the priesthood or a sister. Every human being, because he or she is born a male or female, has the natural right to form a family. But there are cases in which God calls some people to give up, to sacrifice this, and other things for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. And this is why the name supernatural, above nature. Secondly, the natural order, meaning nature. It is the order established by God in creation. When God created the world, He designed a nature to every creature. Every being's nature is God's plan for that creature. For example, lions eat meat and not grass, because God put it in their nature to be meat eaters. Cows eat grass and not meat, because God put it in their nature. And so on with everything. When God created human beings, God created them male and female. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fertile and multiply." God looked at everything He had made and found it very good. Nature manifests God's plan for creation, and this is the natural order established by God in creation. The anti-natural disorder, meaning against nature. It is when rational beings go against God's plan for creation. It is a disorder, something that goes against nature. Homosexuality is one of the sins against nature. St. Paul says it in the letter to the Romans, chapter 1, verse 26. Therefore, God handed them over to degrading passions. Their females exchanged natural relations for unnatural, and the males likewise gave up natural relations with females and burned with lust for one another. Males did shameful things with males, and thus received in their own persons the due penalty for their perversity. So God, when He created them male and female. How do you know if somebody is male or female? From the medical point of view, we have, first, the chromosomic sex. Every individual is born with a determined sex, which is male when one is Y chromosome, or female when the Y chromosome is absent. It is objectively proved that the genetic sex is the one that determines the rest of the biological components. And this is very important. You are a man or a woman from the moment of conception. It is God's given. Second, the gonadic sex. It is based on the characteristics of sexual glands. Man possesses testicular tissue. Woman possesses ovarian tissue. The third genital conducts sex. Mueller conduct is the woman's conduct. Wolf conduct refers to men's conduct. Fourth, phenotypic or genital sex. This refers to the characteristics present in the external genitals. This is the social way to attribute a sex to a person at the moment of birth. In a normal physical sexuality, there is harmony and concordance between the said four components above: chromosomic, gonadic, genital, and phenotypic. There are anomalies which determine a certain states of intersexuality when there is discordance between the genetic, gonadic, ductal, and phenotypic characteristics of sex. The main anomalies are A. Pseudohermaphroditism, the discordance between the genital and glandular characteristics. This can be female pseudohermaphroditism, male genitals and female glands, that is, ovaries, or male pseudohermaphroditism, female genitals and male glands, that is, testicles. B. True hermaphroditism. It is very rare and it is characterized by the presence of ovarian and testicular tissues at the same time. There are also several hypotheses whether there is a predominantly male phenotype or female phenotype. Transsexualism or transsexuality is something different and diverse. It designates the conflict between physical sex in the components above mentioned and the psychological tendency that is experienced in the opposite direction. In almost all of the cases, the subject has a male physical sex, but psychologically feels as a female or tends to identify himself with the female sex. Opposite cases are rare. Transsexualism presents itself as a syndrome in which there is a psychological impulse, apparently primary, or at least emerged in remote times, of belonging to the opposite sex in the genetic, endocrine, or phenotypic characteristics. This impulse is accompanied by a psychosexual behavior clearly opposed to its anatomical sex, and it is associated with an obsessive desire to get rid of its actual genitals and acquire those of the opposite sex. It is distinguished, therefore, from homosexuality and transvestism. In homosexuality, there is no desire to change sex, but to have sex with same-sex subjects. In transvestism, there is also no desire to change sex, but to dress in clothes of the opposite sex as a condition to achieve sexual arousal, while sexual intercourse is sought with subjects of the opposite sex. It must be said that in transsexualism, from the scientific point of view, the surgical intervention, which is performed in order to adapt the external physical appearances to that of the psychological tendencies, does not overcome the conflict nor fix the harmony with the new sex, but instead it seems to aggravate the sense of frustration. This is more than evident. The most perfect procedure would never be able to perform a true and proper sex mutation. The work of medicine and psychology is to help the patient to reconcile its chromosomic sex, which is God's given and unchangeable, with him or herself. Otherwise, they will do more harm by increasing the division within the patient. He or she will suffer a frustration in its very self. Now I would like to quote a letter to the bishops of the world from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith on the Pastoral Care of Homosexual Persons, given at Rome in October 1st, 1986. It says in the first point, the issue of homosexuality and the moral evaluation of homosexual acts have increasingly become a matter of public debate. The point 3 says explicit treatment of the problem was given in this congregation's declaration on certain questions concerning sexual ethics of December 29, 1975. That document stressed the duty of trying to understand the homosexual condition and noted that culpability for homosexual acts should only be judged with prudence. At the same time, the congregation took note of the distinction commonly drawn between homosexual condition or tendency and individual homosexual actions, the tendency and the actions. These were described as deprived of their essential and indispensable finality as being intrinsically disordered and able in no case to be approved of. Homosexual activity is not a complementary union able to transmit life, and so it thwarts the call to a life of that form of self-giving which the Gospel says is the essence of Christian living. As in every moral disorder, homosexual activity prevents one's own fulfillment and happiness by acting contrary to the creative wisdom of God. Then in number 8, it says, increasing numbers of people today, even within the church, are bringing enormous pressure to bear on the church to accept the homosexual condition as though it were not disordered, or to condone sexual activity. Those within the church who argue in this fashion often have close ties with those with similar views outside it. These latter groups are guided by a vision opposed to the truth about the human person, which is fully disclosed in the mystery of Christ. They reflect, even if not entirely consciously, a materialistic ideology which denies the transcendent nature of the human person, as well as the supernatural vocation of every individual. The Church's ministers must ensure that homosexual persons in their care will not be misled by this point of view so profoundly opposed to the teaching of the Church. The point 15th says, we encourage the bishops then to provide pastoral care in full accord with the teaching of the Church for homosexual persons in their diocese. No authentic pastoral program will include organizations which homosexual persons associate with each other without clearly stating that homosexual activity is immoral. A truly pastoral approach will appreciate the need for homosexual persons to avoid the near occasions of sin. We would hardly encourage programs where these dangers are avoided. But we wish to make it clear that departure from the Church's teaching or silence about it in an effort to provide pastoral care is neither caring nor pastoral. Only what is true can ultimately be pastoral. The neglect of the Church's position prevents homosexual men and women from receiving the care they need and deserve. In bringing this entire matter to the bishop's attention, this congregation wishes to support their efforts to assure that the teaching of the Lord and His Church in this important question be communicated fully to all the faithful. His Holiness Pope John Paul II approved this letter adopted in an ordinary session of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith and ordered it to be published. The final message. The point of these texts is not to condemn people, but to instruct the people on what is right and wrong. Jesus did not come to condemn the world, but to save it. Therefore, we must love sinners, but reject sin. When Jesus forgave the adulterous woman, he said, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She replied, "No, sir." Then Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, do not sin anymore." The focus is on forgiveness, even though at the same time Jesus dismisses the woman by saying, "Do not sin anymore." He has called adultery a sin in order to avoid that people may later misinterpret it by calling adultery as a right. In the same way, we all Catholics are called to focus on the forgiveness of the sin of homosexuality.